Hey guys, it's Miss Lovell. When I'm not in the classroom, I love to garden. Today we're going to be talking about finding area with square units. Now before we jump into helping me with my garden and figuring out which vegetables can go in each square, let's go over some important information.
Okay, before we can start finding the area of the different garden plots that I have, first you might be asking yourself, how do I find area with unit squares? That's a great question. So, whenever you're given any random shape, for example, a rectangle, you take that rectangle and you put unit squares into it. These unit squares have to be the same size and they need to fit into your desired shape. So for this rectangle, I was able to fit in 8 different unit squares. From there, once you have your squares, you just number them. So in this example, I have 8 squares. So the area of this rectangle is 8 square units. Now, you may come across some shapes that are not rectangles or squares. For example, just like this shape that I made. This is an unusual shape, but you can still find the area of this shape by drawing lines and fitting in your unit squares. Remember, all of the unit squares have to be the same size. Once you make your squares, you just number them and count them. So for this red shape, I had 22 unit squares. So the area of this shape is 22 unit squares. Now that you have a better understanding of how you find area with unit squares, let's discuss the different measurement units that we'll be using today. Today we're going to be focusing on 3 different unit square sizes. So to give you a better visual, I put a ruler on my page. We know that on a regular ruler, there's inches and centimeters. Today, whenever we're working with square centimeters, I want you to picture this size in your head. Square centimeters are the smallest unit we're going to be working with today. The next unit we're going to be working with is square inches. A square inch is 1 inch on a ruler. It's a little bit bigger than a square centimeter. The last measurement of unit that we're going to be using today is feet. So this is 1 square foot. In this example, it is a rectangle, so I could fit on the page so you can have a better understanding of how large a square foot is. Normally, this unit would be in the shape of a square, not a rectangle. Whenever we're using square feet, this is the largest unit of measurement we're going to use today. So, just to recap, we have square centimeter, which is the smallest, square inch, which is in the middle of the two, and square feet, which is the largest unit of measure. Now that we've discussed the different sizes, let's get started and start finding the area of some different garden plots. Alright guys, to begin with, we're going to be looking at our Garden A. Now, in Garden A, I have room for 1 square unit. This square unit is in centimeters. So each one of these squares represents 1 square centimeter. So the best way for me to do this is to just count my squares in order to figure out the area. So let's get started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's 9 squares in each row. Let's keep counting. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. Whew, that was a lot of counting. Now, a way that I like to check myself is I count the number in each row, which in the first row we have 9, and then I count the number in each column, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So to the side, I like to say to myself, 9 times 5 equals, and I know that 9 times 5 equals 45. That's just a way that I can check myself. So the area of garden A has 45 square centimeters. Let's move on to garden B. All right, now garden B looks very similar to garden A, but there's one difference. Our square unit is a larger size than the square unit we used in garden A. In this garden, we're going to be using inches. So we're going to be focusing on square inches. So each square represents 1 square inch. Now, we're going to do the exact same thing we did in garden A. We're going to count our squares in order to find the area. When adding all the squares together, it will give us the area of garden B. Let's get started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 square units in one row. Let's continue counting. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So like I did in garden A, I want to double check my work by multiplying the number of squares in each row, which is 6, and the number of squares in each column, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So over here, I'm going to multiply 6 times 4 to double check my work, and I know that 6 times 4 equals 24. So the area of garden B has 24 square inches. Great work, guys. Let's move on to garden C. Now in garden C, we're looking at another different unit of measurement. We're going to be looking at feet in this one. So if you notice, the square is bigger than the centimeter square unit as well as the inches square unit. So feet is a larger unit of measurement than inches and centimeters. So, like I did in the last ones, I'm just going to count all of my squares in order to find out the area of garden C. Let's get started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Now in the last two gardens, in order to check myself, I've been multiplying the squares in each columns times the squares in each row. But because this one's by 5, I know how to skip count by 5, so I'm going to start and double check myself by skip counting by 5. 5, 10, 15. So by doing this, I realized that 5 times 3 equals 15. So the area of garden C has 15 square feet. Fantastic work, guys. Let's move on to garden D. Now, garden D looks very different from garden A, B, and C. This garden is not in the shape of a rectangle. This garden is in a different shape. So, because of this, I won't be able to multiply the number of squares in the rows and columns because it won't give me an accurate area amount. So, for this one, I'm just going to be counting the squares. Before I get started on counting my squares, I'm going to make sure I look at my square unit. In this garden, I'm going to be using square inches. So let's figure out the area of garden D by counting the squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So by counting the squares, I was able to find out that the area of this different shape has 14 square inches. So for my answer, I'm going to write the area of garden D has 14 square inches. Great work, guys. Let's move on to garden E. Garden E also looks very different from my other gardens. This is a garden I have yet to make. I'm going to be creating a new garden and I want to find out the area of the garden before I make it. So in my grid, I have a rectangle. This rectangle represents the sides of the garden. So now I have to figure out how many square units I need to figure out the area. Do you have any idea on how I could find this out? You're right, I need squares in order to find it out. So all I need to do is draw lines in order to make my square units. So I'm going to connect the lines all the way down. So 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, and 1 line across. By doing this, I now see squares. So now that I've found my squares, I can count my squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So by doing this, I found out that the area of garden E will have 10 square units. So I'm going to write that in my blank. Area equals 10 square units. Okay, so I want to end this lesson with a question for you. Would you use more square inches or square centimeters to cover the garden, and why? So we're looking at square centimeters, which is this large, versus square inches, which is this large. Which one is the smaller unit? You're right, centimeters is smaller than inches. So now we need to think about which one would we use more of? Would we use more square centimeters to fill the garden or more square inches to fill the garden? You're right, we would have to use more square centimeters to fill the garden because it is the smaller unit. Now, if the question was reversed and I wanted to use the least amount of squares, which square would I choose? Centimeters or inches? Right, we would use inches because it is larger, so it would take less squares to fill up my garden. I've had a blast learning about finding area through unit squares with y'all today.
Thank you so much for helping me in my garden today. Y'all did fantastic with finding the area with unit squares. I'll see y'all next time.